Good morning. My name is Yasara Antar, and I'm a president of the Board of Trustees of Mainline Unitarian Church. It is good to have you with us. In case you're wondering, I am filling in for Marlise. She is your trustee for January. She got exposed to the COVID on Friday. She tested negative 14 times since Friday. Marlise, do not test a 15th time. She may or may not have it. Stay safe, Marlise. Our worship team this morning is Dr. Emma Mellon, our worship associate, Dr. Vincent Craig, our music director, and Caroline Bright. Caroline, you want to be a doctor?
Sure.
Okay. Dr. Caroline Bright, our intern, our ministerial intern. Our special guest minister is Reverend Libby Smith. She was ordained in 1992 and has served as both a parish minister and a chaplain. Now that she's retired from congregational life, she sees her work as a part-time patchwork ministry of trying to say yes, made up mostly of guest preaching and officiating rites of passage. She has a long association with MLEC over the decades and is delighted to be back. We are delighted to have you back, Reverend Libby. Anyone joining for the first time today? Welcome. Stop by the membership table and coffee hour after the service. Ask us anything. We have answers. If it's not 42, who are we? We are Unitarian Universalists. We believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every human being. Yes, even that group, even those people. We seek to welcome you, to welcome your whole self, your truths, your doubts, your worries, and your hopes. We need not think alike to love alike. A couple announcements today. The newly renovated youth library is open in the Wonder Room. Stop by 201 and check out a book. Some room switching. The first film in a 6-part series on the history of Unitarian Universalism will be held at 11:30 in McGinnis. Note, that is a change from the rec room. The Death and Dying workshop will be held in this room, the main room. Lastly, trivia question, when is trivia night? Anybody know? Sally? Do you know? It is on February 11th at 7 p.m. Open to everyone. Tickets are $25. Kids are free. You don't get a free kid. They're a bad investment. But they are free. Come, it'll be fun. Registration, you can find a link in January newsletter. January's newsletter has a Sign Up Genius link. Or see Sally Fritzen, or write to Sally Fritzen. There she is. She's the one waving in the back. That's Sally, sfritzen@gmail.com. Or it'll be on eNotes and Community Matters, and maybe the front page soon. Have a minister's minute.
Well, let the record show. I wanted this to be the intern's interlude, but I will take minister's minute. So I was given a task today by Reverend Dave, and that is, number one, to hype up the lecture lunch on Wednesday, which he will be responsible for. Now, he sent a very cryptic email that involved what seemed like references to renewable energy, but then he said it wasn't about renewable energy. He talked about wind and sun and water and energy, but said it wasn't about environmental sustainability. So, Wednesday, lecture lunch. All of the details are on the calendar at mluc.org. Would recommend you check out that calendar because you will learn about many other upcoming events, including but not limited to this Date with Death series. Yeah, exactly. I love a good cheer for Date with Death. That sounds promising, right? I mean, it's coming for all of us. Might as well prepare. So our wonderful parish nurse, Anne, and I will be running this 6-part series. You don't have to come to all of them. You can drop in. You can come to 1. You can come to 6. That's great. We're going to be in this room after the service. We're at 11:30 today for our first session, which is called Getting Comfortable with Death Talk. So we're going to get through some of that awkwardness. There will be jokes. There might even be laughter. You might laugh so hard you cry. Who could say? Who could say exactly how it will unfold? But it's going to be informative. It's going to be a good time. So that was the big thing. Was Reverend Dave's lecture launch on Wednesday, Date with Death series coming up starting today at 11:30. So without further ado, let's get to that mission.
Please silence your devices and affirm our mission statement with me. Together, we transform lives through love, service, and our welcoming faith.
For our chalice lighting this morning, we look to the words of Maureen Kaloran. Let us look first to the response of love. In these hard times, let us look first to the response of love. In the midst of challenge, may our chalice flame bear witness to the inherent worth and dignity of every human being. In the midst of uncertainty, may our chalice be a beacon of encouragement that our values may guide our choices. Let us look first to the response of love.
Our call to worship comes from the writing of the Reverend Gary Kowalski. In this quiet hour, may our spirits be renewed. In this gathering of friends, may we be ready to extend ourselves to those in need and with trust to receive the hand that is offered. In this community of ideals, may we remember the principles that guide us and reflect upon those things that give meaning to our lives, renewing our dedication to serve the highest that we know. In this time of worship, may our minds be open to new truth and our hearts be receptive to love as we give thanks for this life that we are blessed to share. And would you join us, please, in singing? I had a mental note, but not a written note, and that just never works for me. Hymn number 17, and I'm going to be referring to the text of this hymn in my sermon. This is one I've loved since I was a child. The tune is a little more challenging, but Vincent assured me that it's familiar to you from hearing it as a musical piece, if not from singing it every night and every morn.
So, as some of you might know, I have the immense privilege of filling in for Dawn Starr while she is on sabbatical, and thus I am now both your intern and your Dawn Starr. It is an exciting moment. However, as I'm sure many of you will become acutely aware, I do not have the decades of experience in religious education that Dawn Starr has. So I appreciate the patience and grace that all of you are going to give me, including when I refer to notes during the time for all ages. Just so that I know what I'm doing, mostly. So this month, our theme is finding your center, okay? And one of the things that can help us find our center is when we make choices. So I'm gonna pull out the Wonder Box, and we're gonna take a look at what's in the Wonder Box together. Now, I know, I put the thing in the Wonder Box, so, you know, I'm not gonna guess. Let's see if I can get this. I always feel like a pop star when I wear this, and then it falls off. So, all right, so we have the Wonder Box, everyone. So I'm gonna open it. Can I have someone come up and take this item out of the Wonder Box for me? Say a volunteer, come on up, come on up, come on up. take this item out for him. What? And indeed, what do we have here? Numbers, excellent. Thank you so much. Have any of you seen something like this before? Okay. So when I was in school, we called this a cootie catcher. In these pandemic times, that's perhaps not the terminology we want to go with. So we're going with paper fortune teller. Now, for those of you who are familiar, what happens is you see these symbols. We've got a heart, we've got a question mark, a chalice, of course, a smiley face. They're all different colors. And your first step is that you have to make a choice and decide which one you want to go with, okay? So this is how you start to make these decisions. We're going to literally get to the center of the paper fortune teller by making choices. Okay, so let's see. I have red, yellow, green, and blue. Let's see. Who thinks we should start with red? Raise your hand. Okay, who thinks we should start with blue? Okay, any takers for yellow? Okay, not as many yellow fans. Okay, green. Green? I perhaps appropriately think that blue actually got the most votes. Interesting. So, this microphone is not my friend today, let me tell you. Okay. All right. So, we're going with blue. B-L-U-E. Okay. Our numbers, 3, 4, 7, and 8. Okay. Who wants to guess at a number? Raise a hand. Raise a hand. I'm going to have you pick a number. 8. You're making me work. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Ooh, same 4 numbers again. Let's go with 7, 4, or 3. 3. Oh, okay. She's up here. Wendy's in charge. So, okay, we're going with 3. So I am going to open number 3 that says yearn to learn, appropriate. And here's the question that it asks us. What is something new that you learned this week? Right? So take a moment right now and just think about what's the new thing that you learned this week? What's the new piece of information? Maybe it was this morning. Maybe you learned about a date with death. Maybe it was that you learned the temperature in Philadelphia is ridiculous and can change dramatically. Who knows? It's the beginning of a new year. And we are all working to find our center. And the first step in doing that is making choices and then learning what comes with that. And through that, both children and adults can learn what is at the core of who we are. Now, appropriately, we've started coming of age, which is very exciting. And at this point, I would like to invite all of the coming of age folks, all of our workshop folks, all of our crossing paths folks, volunteers, everybody, head out that back door. I'm going to be joining you out there.
Our offering outreach organization for this month is the Patrician Society. And I'm happy to say that Ken Rainey, who is on our offering outreach committee, is also on the Patrician Society, is a volunteer for the Patrician Society, and is here to tell us about it. Ken?
Thank you. I take off the mask and I say, who is that masked man? Ah, that's Betsy Plume's husband. We know him. If I were suddenly struck poor, I'd head for Norristown. That may surprise you. Norristown's not a pretty town. The police aren't perfect. There's a lot of slumlord housing. But it also has organizations and people that are caring, and I think I could survive. One of those organizations is the Patrician Society. In spite of its name, which is because it's housed in the basement of St. Patrick's Church and was founded by actually a man named Patrick, is a food pantry. Norristown has no supermarket. It has bodegas, a few small groceries, and the food aisles in CVS and other big drugstores, all of which are higher priced. But the Patrician Society, which is basically a food pantry, provides a weekly basket of food, groceries, canned goods, fresh fruits and vegetables, and even some treats to about 200 families every week. That demand has been growing, and the patricians have been able to actually provide more frequent offerings of food to its clients because of the generosity of organizations like MLUC. And in addition to food, being a food bank, it also, when it has the funds, can help people out of falling into homeless because they couldn't pay their utility bill. They don't give them the cash, they give it to the utility. But I've been surprised and impressed by what it does to deal with individual people as people. A woman came in this past week who had just been put into a welfare hotel because she couldn't pay her rent or something like that. So a custom basket was put together for her that would allow her to get by without a kitchen. Same is true of homeless people. There are also clients who are, shall we say, have personality challenges who couldn't get along in a supermarket even if they had the money. So I joined the Patrician Society as a volunteer when we last had it as our offering outreach partner 5 years ago. So on behalf of us, I thank us on behalf of the Patrician Society for your generosity. And that's it. I'll be outside if any of you have any questions. I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Ken. It's nice to have someone who really knows the place. You can donate into the basket in cash or check, or you can use the QR code on the order of service, or follow the instructions on the screen for those viewing remotely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Candles of Community today is bringing us many deaths. For the new people, we share during this time our joys and sorrows. And after each announcement, please say with me, we hold you in our hearts. As you may know, Del Tweedy died on Friday morning at 9:30, very peacefully. Del was one of the founding members of MLUC. He was extraordinarily involved in the church's life until a few years ago and led the church through many lay leadership roles and during many of its phases, including the rebuilding after the fire. He was beloved by all who knew him. There is much that can be said about Del, and there will be time at a memorial service here at MLUC, and that will be announced. And there will also be one at Bear Mountain, his beloved mountain retreat. His family has asked that he be remembered with both joy and sorrow. For Del and his family and all here who knew him, we hold you in our hearts. Thank you. Aileen Bosworth, friend of MLUC, died peacefully last Friday while a friend played Silent Night and Amazing Grace on her flute. For Aileen, we hold you in our hearts. Luna Wirt, aged 4, is undergoing treatment for a recurrence of a brain tumor. We hold Luna and Luna's parents, Margot and Ewan, in our hearts. We hold you in our hearts. On January 12th, Mary Sawyer, a longtime member of MLUC, will be celebrating her 102nd birthday. If you'd like to send a card or be in touch, she is at the mansion at Rosemont. Mary, we hold you in our hearts. Mary Kane shares the good news that she has been invited to share her artwork at a reception on Friday, January 13th at the Church Street Gallery in Westchester from 5 to 8 o'clock. It's her solo show, and you are invited to join her that evening. Mary and her art, we hold you in our hearts. For Denise Pettit's dear friend Jackie Conrad, who lost her daughter to cancer on Christmas Day. And Jackie also lost both her best friend and a cousin the following week. So for Jackie and the people she has lost, we hold you in our hearts. Doug Hunt had an emergency upper endoscopy to repair a stomach bleed. He is recovering in Lankenau Hospital and will probably be home on Monday. All good wishes will be gratefully accepted. Doug, we hold you in our hearts. And for all who carry with them joys and sorrows unspoken, we hold you in our hearts. Our reading for reflection today prepares us for Libby's sermon, and it is a traditional Zen teaching story. So we'll have to leave our logical minds aside and let this take us. I'll read it twice, and then we'll have a few moments of silence. Once upon a time, as a monk was walking through a forest, he saw a tiger peering out at him from the underbrush. As the monk turned to run, he heard the tiger spring after him to give chase. Barely ahead of the tiger and running for his life, our hero came to the edge of a steep cliff. Clinging to a strong vine, the monk climbed over the cliff edge just as the tiger was about to pounce. Hanging over the side of the cliff with the hungry tiger pacing above him, the monk looked down and was dismayed to see another tiger stalking the ravine from below. Just then, cliff face above him and began to gnaw at the vine. At that precise moment, the monk noticed a patch of wild strawberries growing from a clump of earth near where he dangled. Reaching out, he plucked one. It was plump and perfectly ripe, warmed by the sunshine. He popped the strawberry into his mouth. It was perfectly delicious. Once upon a time, as a monk was walking through the forest, he saw a tiger peering out from him. As he turned to run, the tiger sprang after him. Barely ahead of the tiger, running for his life, he came to the edge of a steep cliff, and he climbed over just as the tiger was beginning to pounce. Hanging on the side of the cliff, with the hungry tiger pacing above, the monk looked down and was dismayed to see another tiger. Just then, a mouse darted out from the crack in the cliff and began to gnaw at the vine. At that precise moment, the monk noticed a patch of wild strawberries. Reaching out, he plucked one. It was plump and perfectly ripe, warmed by the sunshine. He popped the strawberry into his mouth. It was perfectly delicious.
It's a special treat to hear the music this morning and to see Dr. Craig in a different musical role than the one with which I am familiar. Great fun. Thank you so much, Vincent, and all of you. And it's interesting that you're about to start this series on death and getting comfortable talking about death, because that's where this whole sermon comes from. It began last spring when a beloved member of my tiny little Mennonite church, where I am a member, and a dear friend of mine, was dying of cancer. She had just gone on to hospice care, and folks in the congregation were having a really hard time accepting that there was nothing further that could be done. And she was part of a small group that I'm in that works very similarly to the Soul Matters groups that you folks have here. It's a small discussion group for spiritual exploration and support. And after our Zoom meeting last April, during her time to share, she mentioned that she had been surprised to find that people were not shying away from the topic of death with her, as she had expected them to. In fact, she was surprised to find that people were eager to talk with her about death, to the point perhaps sometimes that she wished they could sometimes talk about something else. And then she said something that really woke me up. She said, when you're talking to people about death, it's really important to bring all your joy to the conversation. Now, this little group didn't have much opportunity for, crosstalk and discussion. Like a Soul Matters group, one person at a time would talk in depth and everyone else would listen intently. And at the end, we'd have some conversation, but she had to leave a little early that evening. And I never got to ask her exactly what she meant. And it was quite a long time then before I was able to see her because she was too ill and weak for visitors. So I sat with that statement and I pondered on it, and I came to my own conclusions. I got the clear impression that she was finding all of those conversations about death difficult. Not because she was afraid of death or in denial about her own death, because she absolutely was not, but because people approached those conversations so very seriously. They'd become afraid to laugh or be lighthearted in her presence, as if it would be somehow disrespectful. So I don't think she was saying, I don't want to talk about death. I think she was saying, bring me your joy. Be fully alive as we talk about death. Please don't talk to me as if I'm already dead. It's really hard sometimes to bring our joy to conversations about death. And that's true when we're being literal, when we're talking with a good friend who is, in fact, dying. It's also true on a more metaphorical level, whenever we're facing big, scary, painful things, the state of the world, the fragility of our lives. And this call to bring my joy to a conversation about death came soon after the start of the war in Ukraine. And I remember those early days last spring when the war was first unfolding and the horrors were still so fresh and so new. And seeing those devastating photographs of the refugee children traveling alone, people fleeing with their pets strapped to their chests, families weeping as they said goodbye as one was staying behind to fight and the other was leaving with the children. And it was so hard to look at those pictures. And yet I felt that at least I could bear witness. If there was nothing else I could do besides send some money, at least I could be willing to look and see and try to understand. And at the same time, at the exact same time last spring, we were having an incredibly glorious early spring. The green was bursting out everywhere. The birdsong was ringing out in the early mornings as I took my walks, and then I would read these articles full of war and suffering, and I couldn't help but feel joy at the beauty all around me, and then I felt so guilty for feeling joyful when people were suffering such devastation. And then my sister sent me an article. My sister is great about sending me what I need before I know I need it. Some of you may remember a sermon I preached a couple of years ago where I mentioned the Jerusalem Dance Challenge, and then Jay was able to sneak it in at the end of the video so that you all got to actually see these dancing nuns. She had sent that to me several days before as I was struggling with the sermon, and it gave me exactly what I needed to finish the sermon. This time it was an article from the New York Times from a writer named Margaret Renkel. Maybe some of you are familiar with her. I think she's down south somewhere. And she writes a lot about nature. And in this article, she wrote about the tension of experiencing the joy and the beauty of the spring, even as we know that the earth is in peril, and that we as humans are largely responsible for that peril, and that so much of the greenery that was lifting her heart is actually the result of invasive species that are doing damage, and that she knows she does not even deserve this joy. And yet, she writes, I refuse to quell this joy. It's possible to understand what invasive species are doing to the woods and still feel the leaping heart of joy in greenness. It's entirely possible to understand what human beings are doing to the woods and to one another in this moment of dread and grief and terrible struggle, and still exult in birdsong and tiny blooming flowers peeking out from the dead leaves of autumn. In this troubled world, it would be a crime to snuff out any flicker of happiness that somehow leaps into life. And then she goes on to say, we are creatures built for joy. At the very saddest funerals, we can hear a funny story about our lost beloved, and God help us, we laugh. We can stagger out of an appointment where a person in a white coat has given us the news we think we cannot bear to hear, and still we smile at the baby in the checkout line clapping her chubby hands at the balloons by the cash register, or kicking her feet in joy at a stranger's smile. This is who we are, the very best of who we are. And she closes by saying, turn your face up to the sky. Listen, the world is shivering into possibility. The world is reminding us that this is what the world does best. New life, rebirth, the greenness that rises out of ashes. We are creatures built for joy, she tells us. This is our center, somehow, even in the midst of sorrow and pain. When I was growing up in our little humanist Unitarian Universalist fellowship in York, Pennsylvania, that hymn we used for our opening hymn every night and every morn was one of my favorites. That haunting music from Ralph Vaughan Williams and the poetry from William Blake. Those lines, joy and woe are woven fine, clothing for the soul divine. Under every grief and pine runs a joy with silken twine. And then, it is right, it should be so, we are made for joy and woe. And when this we rightly know, safely through the world we go. Yes, as Margaret Renkel says, we are creatures built for joy. And as William Blake says, we are made for joy and woe. One does not preclude the other. As I thought about this, I realized there are for me two very different kinds of circumstances where I have a lot of trouble living in that reality that joy and woe are woven fine, when I really have to struggle to bring my joy to that conversation about death. Sometimes when I'm in the presence of someone's pain or suffering, I may be aware of the joy in my own life, but it can feel inappropriate or even disrespectful to acknowledge that joy. How dare I feel joy when my friend is dying, when refugees are running from the bombs, when the earth is on fire? It's also a struggle to bring my joy or to find any joy when I'm trapped in my own personal fear or pain or sorrow. When we face really hard things in our own personal lives, whether it's our own death or our own safety or our own grief, it can be very hard to connect with joy. There's a line I love in a children's book called The Knowing Book, where the narrator is reminding the reader, these young children, to trust their lives and to live with enthusiasm and confidence. And she writes, "There is magic about you, but it hides." Sometimes the magic feels very well hidden indeed, and we lose sight of the possibility of joy. But as Caroline reminded us with the Time for All Ages this morning, we're constantly making choices. Difficult choices sometimes, but choices that can lead us back to our center. And while we may find it very difficult, I believe that the claiming of joy, even in the midst of death, whether that death be literal or metaphorical, is an imperative of the spiritual life. The Buddhist story that Emma read for us this morning makes that point in an unmistakable way. It's a classic Zen teaching tale. I'm sure it was familiar to many of you. And I found an interesting commentary on it by a Dr. Munwar Kazmir, who's a Pakistani medical doctor and humanitarian. I found this commentary online. It seemed to be written by Dr. Kazmir, but at the end of the piece it also said contributing writer Brooke Bell, and so I want to name her too because I'm not sure what came from whom. Dr. Kazmir points out that this very well-known story is hard for people. He writes, "Now most of us don't like this story. Even devout students of Zen Buddhism struggle with this teaching and its meaning. Most particularly in societies heavily influenced by Hollywood, modern tastes generally run more toward the happy ending. We want the mouse to speak, perhaps, to offer to save the man in some magical transaction. We want the strawberry to transform the man into a bird who flies away to safety. But most of all, we just can't stand the ending of The Tiger and the Strawberry. The most burning question is left unanswered, dangling. What happens to the man? Except, he says, we already know what happens to the man. Of course we do. He dies." Dr. Kazmir goes on to remind us that the monk's plight in this story is really the reality that we are all exactly in the middle of every single day. Given how unlikely it was statistically that we would ever evolve into life in the first place, and how perilous life is, we really shouldn't be here at all. As he puts it, and now I'm back to Dr. Kazmir, considering that we are here, and considering that we won't really be around all that long, even if we die of extreme old age, considering this should instill a profound sense of appreciation for the present moment. There is no staying off that cliff. There is no avoiding those tigers forever. The mouse of inexorable time is gnawing away at our lifeline moment by moment. The only choice is whether or not we will notice, eat, and enjoy the strawberry. Because whether we enjoy it or ignore it, we're still getting eaten by that tiger. And then he closes with a quotation from the Buddhist monk Pema Chodron. "Tigers above, tigers below. This is actually the predicament that we are always in terms of our birth and death. Each moment is just what it is. It might be the only moment of our life. It might be the only strawberry we'll ever eat. We could get depressed about it, or we could finally appreciate it and delight in the preciousness of every single moment of our lives." That monk in our story brought all his joy to a conversation about death in the most literal way I can imagine. And the strawberry was perfectly sweet. If you know much about Buddhism, you know they don't shy away from talking about death. There are long meditations designed specifically to encourage you to imagine and envision your own death, to become comfortable with the reality of the transience of life. And then to live our lives within the context of that awareness of our coming death, making each moment so precious. That's a very clear part of the message of Buddhism. I actually believe that to be a very clear part of the message of Christianity, too, and part of what the journey from crucifixion to resurrection is all about. But I will grant you that most of that gets lost in conventional Christian theology, which puts so much emphasis on the resurrection as an event that has defeated death. And so Christianity can become a very death-denying faith, depending on how it's practiced. In the Mennonite Church on Easter, we actually sing a hymn that says, "For Jesus has risen and we shall not die." But of course we will die. And everyone I'm singing that hymn with knows that we will die. They may believe there's something that follows that death, but that's not the same as not dying. For me, the message is not that Jesus conquered death or that we won't die. It's that even in the face of death, joy can still arise. It's not that the crucifixion is canceled out by the resurrection, not for me. The miracle is that those two things can coexist, that the lifting of the spirit, the capacity for joy and rebirth, is so strong that even death can't knock it out of us. Now, this isn't a sermon on UU understandings of the resurrection, and you can have me back on Easter if you want to hear more about that. I'll talk to Reverend Dave. But I do believe that what happened for the disciples was that even in their grief and death, their grief and their fear after Jesus' death, the example he had set for them of living with love and compassion and dedication was so powerful that they felt that ongoing presence of the love and the joy that it had brought them. Sort of a cosmic version of the way we laugh with joy through our tears as we remember our loved ones at funerals. Joy and woe are woven fine. One does not cancel out the other. Throughout our lives, we face very real pain and suffering and fear. So I don't mean this to be a Pollyanna sermon saying, just look at the bright side and count your blessings and everything will be fine. Sometimes it's not fine. But it is a reminder that in the midst of the pain and the suffering and the fear, we are still called to honor and experience joy as well. And doing so is not a betrayal of those who suffer. It's not a denial of the hardship of our own lives. It takes courage to look for joy when things are at their worst. But staying in touch with the joy is what sustains us through the struggle and gives us the energy to work for everything that is still beautiful and good in our own fragile lives and in this beautiful but broken world that we all share. Just about a year ago, I attended the installation of the Reverend McKinley Sims at the UU congregation in Mount Airy. And my dear colleague, Kent Mathias, gave the charge to the congregation at that event. And I want to quote his words to you because they stayed with me so powerfully that I wrote to him and asked him if I could have a copy of his charge. He charged the congregation to transform lives as disciples of love, courage, and hope. And then he gave them 3 specific ways they should do that. And the first was to keep on loving life. So these are now Kent Mathias' words. Celebrate life like David, who danced before the Lord with all his might. Sing like Mercedes Sosa, gracias a la vida que me adora tanto, thanks to life which has given me so much. Engage with beauty for the sake of beauty. Listen to Mozart and Marsalis. Exalt in the paintings of Botero and Modigliani. Take hikes along the blazing azaleas of the Wissahickon. Loving life will keep your soul battery full. Loving life will help you live out and to share the truth of resurrection. You don't have to wait for a heavenly chariot to take you away to some far-off land. By growing, learning, and changing, you can be born into being more fully alive right now. we can be born again and again and again. Thank you, Reverend Kent. So keep on loving life, our challenging, perilous, sometimes terrifying life. Our life is full of conversations about death, literal or figurative. Some of you will stay and have one of those conversations today. There's always pain and there's always sorrow, because we're all always dying. But loving life will help us live out and share the truth of resurrection, because we can be born again and again and again. I was finally able to visit my dear friend before she died, and we did indeed end up talking about death. But we also relished the beauty of our surroundings and the beauty of our friendship. We affirmed life. We laughed a lot. We summoned our courage and we brought all our joy to the conversation. And so may we all, today and every day. And as a reminder to help us do that, let's sing together. If you'll turn to number 9, is it 95? 95 in the hymnal. And thanks to Vincent for this perfectly appropriate choice. There is more love somewhere, more love, more hope, more joy. Words of benediction from Kendall Gibbons. There is finally only one thing required of us, that is to take life whole, the sunlight and the shadows together, to live the life that is given us with courage and humor and truth. We have such a little moment out of the vastness of time for all our wondering and loving. Therefore, let there be no half-heartedness. Rather, let the soul be ardent in its pain, in its yearning, and in its praise. Then shall peace enfold our days, and glory shall not fade from our lives. May we go forth in peace. Amen.